I just don't, it's not known to me. So I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm just putting a question mark after your question mark.
Elliot Greenspan.
Hi, Elliot. How are you?
Very good, yourself. With the LaRouche PAC. Take your definition of Cold War. Conflict greater than cooperation. What I would proffer is the potential, first, to identify who is responsible for this conflict at the highest level. And I'd like your thinking. I'll say something about it. And secondly, how do you actually take this moment, which is a very extraordinary moment, in the wake of the collapse of the Russiagate fraud, of this big lie. Trump is relatively liberated, potentially, to do the kind of thing he's been trying to do, as in Buenos Aires, which was shut down, as in Helsinki, where he was called a traitor, and so on, is that on the one side, go to the level of British intelligence, British geopolitics. I could elaborate all night, I don't have time, and so on, but above Brennan. Brennan was visited by Hannigan of British intelligence in December of 2015. And Hannigan said to Brennan, we have communications between the Kremlin and Trump. Investigate it. And that is the origin. You've identified Brennan's role, and so on. This is the history, 20th century history of British imperial geopolitics.
Yeah, Elliot, I know this narrative, but what's the point you want to make?
The point I want to make is that the question becomes, because your vision is extraordinarily frightening, how do you create cooperation? There is a new dynamic in the world, the Belt and Road Initiative. The Italian government is the first of the G7 countries to have signed on 1 week ago. This opens up a potential for what LaRouche proposed 20 years ago. Russia, US, China, India, a Rooseveltian combination which is stronger than British imperial financial oligarchy. So, and final point.
You're going to get too much from my brain, though, at some point here to process.
The final point is think about the basis for such cooperation. Strategic defense of Earth. The scientific cooperation in terms of Moon-Mars missions, which Trump is now picking up on, as is Russia, China, India. Massive infrastructure building in this country and internationally. My request is that you, given you are the most controversial Russian expert, and you know your stuff, put that solution concept forward. That's what I'm asking for your thoughts on.
Right. So, briefly, I don't agree with you at all that Trump, wait a minute, no wait, I don't mean I don't agree with him at all, that's not right. I understand a good deal of what you're saying, but I don't agree that Trump is now free to pursue whatever Russia policy he wants. It's just not the case. This is far from over. Far, far from over. I wrote a couple articles in the last 3 weeks. One was basically no matter what Mueller finds, it isn't going to end the Russiagate accusations against Trump. But also it's left an image of Russia as a country that attacked us. And people believe that. And that has to be talked away or contexted. So even if Trump knew what to do about Russia today, even if he knew to have his private, and these things are done privately at first, private messenger, go and speak to Putin or Putin's private messenger and agree on a doable agenda. I'm not sure Trump knows how to do that now, or that he's not so dispirited by the beating he took over cooperate with Russia. I found his kid, whom I don't find sympathetic, rather sympathetic the other night when he said, you know, how does it feel for a family to wake up every day and hear you're a bunch of Russian agents? It's not nice. So there's bitterness, but there's also caution. I'm not sure Trump will venture, but if you're asking me where I would start, and I've bored people to death with this, I would start with terrorism and orphans. In this regard, you know the famous Trump Tower meeting where Don, the idiot, decided to gather these people who were all idiots themselves to have an idiotic conversation about subjects they knew nothing about? Right. So the woman shows up, the great Kremlin agent, some ambulance-chasing Russian lawyer who wasn't even from Moscow. She's from the Moscow Oblast, which means the county of Moscow. She had no Kremlin connections whatsoever. Yeselnitsky or something like that. And later, Don Jr. said, and they all said he's lying, oh, she wanted to talk about orphans. And they said the Trumps were lying again, but that is exactly what she wanted to talk about. And they had no idea what she was talking about because they knew nothing about Russia. And the short story is this, that after we passed the Magnitsky Bill, sanctioning people in Russia for what we thought were human rights violations, the Kremlin banned American adoptions of Russian orphans. Right? You all remember this history. So, prior to that moment, I don't know how many, but thousands of American families had adopted Russian orphans. Lots of people adopted Russian orphans. And I'm not going to tell you why Russian, because you all know. You all know why Russian orphans, right? Not because they were in love with Slavic culture. Right? They wanted a certain skin color, right? So they went to Russia. This got blown up, and about, I'm not sure about the number, 200 American families who had gone through the very long, moving, emotional, and financially expensive process of getting to know the Russian kid and doing all you had to do, suddenly were denied the right to take the kids home that they were literally within 30 days of doing. So, I'm getting to the point now. I don't know how many of those families still want those kids. I don't know how many of those kids have been adopted by other families or have gotten older to the point they don't want to come to America. I don't know. But I'm saying to Mr. Putin and I'm telling Mr. Trump, give us some orphans. And that will soften the image of Putin in the United States. Who's going to attack orphans? Actually, somebody did in yesterday's New York Times. There's always somebody. Sinister, this orphan image. But we need to find an approach, Elliot. This is not big geopolitics. We need to find an approach, like Gorbachev did in December 1986 when he released Sakharov. You all remember Andrei Sakharov. He had been in exile, house arrest. He wasn't in prison, but he'd been banished from Moscow to the city of Gorky, and Gorbachev released him. I think we were in Moscow, Katrina, December 1986, and American views of Gorbachev changed overnight. He released Sakharov. Sakharov is the liberal icon. Gorbachev said to Andrei Dmitrievich, come home and continue. He literally said on the phone, Andrei Dmitrievich, иди домой и продолжать вашу работу. Come home and continue your work. And suddenly Americans said, Gorbachev, cuddly guy, our guy. So let Putin give some orphans. As for the issue, I'd start with terrorism. For one reason. Russia's been hit even harder than we have been by terrorism. If you add up the Russian victims of terrorism, not in Syria, but in Russia, they exceed what we lost on 9/11. We are both threatened by these terrorist groups. These terrorist groups are in search of radioactive material. If they get it, imagine radioactive material on the planes of 9/11, or the bombs in Paris, or the bombs in Nice, or anywhere a terrorist sets off a bomb and they've mixed in some radioactive material. You won't be able to go to that area for a generation or two. This is existential. We are not very good at this kind of intelligence because we don't have the resources in that part of the world. You know who's really good at it? Russia. First of all, they have more Arabic speakers than we have French speakers, probably. But who warned us about the Tsarnaev brothers, who then blew the Boston Marathon? The Russians. You all know this? No. Well, so what happened was Russians picked up through their intelligence the older Tsarnaev brother who was traveling around Russia on a vacation, talking to his terrorist buddies about what they planned to do. And the Russians picked it up. So they called up the FBI and the CIA guy at the embassy American embassy in Moscow, and nothing happened. So then they informed Washington. Nothing happened, except one thing. The FBI sent an agent to Mrs. Tsarnaev and said, we hear your son's a terrorist. And she said, no, he's a really, really nice boy. And yet, how kind he is. You know how kind, yesterday he went to the grocery for me, and the guy went home and said he shops for his mother. That was the end of it. You know, 6 weeks later, the brothers blew the Boston Marathon. So the Russians, as Obama liked to say, the Russians know stuff. He means shit, but he can't say shit. He's always saying, we know stuff, I know stuff. Okay. This is something the Russians know. An alliance with Russia against international terrorism, wherever it is, would make us all a lot safer. And it's been thwarted. Remember, Obama went halfway and then was pulled back from an anti-alliance, an anti-terrorist alliance with Putin. He was pulled back right after it was agreed. So that would be where I would start. Orphans and terrorists. And go from there for the new détente. Not grand, Elliot, but I think it would work. Even Trump could make it work. He doesn't have a dog. That worries me because, you know, I can't remember a president that didn't have a dog. And if you don't have a dog, I wonder if you really care about orphans. So I admit that my argument may be vulnerable. He doesn't lie with you.
My name's Suzanne Klebe. I'm also with the LaRouche organization. And when we had
Who's in charge here tonight, you or Elliot?
Well, when you had spoken a while ago with the East-West Accord Committee, and also I brought up this question of the change in the strategic picture because of the Silk Road. And Elliot just mentioned that the
You have to explain what that is to the people.
Well, what it is it's the end of the colonial policy post-World War II. And it's a shift, as you said that night. You said Putin's down with it, he agrees, but the reason it won't be taken up in Washington is because the powers there support a unipolar world, and they will not back a multipolar world. That was what you said. And we just went through this extraordinary situation of those people in Washington, or what they call themselves the 17 intelligence agencies, stopping the President of the United States from even having discussions with the President of Russia, all from the same standpoint, that Trump collaborating with Russia or with China, because the next big attack will be on China, particularly with what just happened with the Italians joining on this thing, that their intent was to make sure that there could not even be a discussion. I mean, you never saw such hysteria. Even the fact that Trump was going to talk to Putin created hysteria. So I have two questions on this. One is that after Iraq, there was no investigation of U.S. intelligence and British intelligence, although there were the Chilcot hearings in London about how the intelligence assessment was so wrong. And we went through this hell.
He's telling me I got to wrap up.
My question is, would you support the proposal now to actually investigate what the intelligence agencies did to set up a phony pro-war situation now with the danger of a confrontation with Russia?
I would more than endorse that idea. I have advocated it, but I would not put in the conclusion that you put in until we have the investigation, because that's not an investigation. How many of you remember the Church Committee? All right. So Senator Frank Church of Idaho, I think, and John Towers, a conservative Republican, headed a committee in the Senate in the 90s that investigated what the intelligence services had been doing. And the findings were shocking. I mean, known to some people, but shocking. We need, and I mean not abstractly, we need an authoritative. By authoritative, I mean one respected or accepted by all parties that has legitimacy. National inquiry, presumably in the Congress, but there may be another way of doing it, to what our intelligence services did to bring down Trump first as a candidate and then as a president, because they did something. All right, let us say we hate Trump and we don't care, but if this is a permanent force in our politics, what makes you think they're not going to do it to the Democratic candidate they don't like, or some Republican candidate they don't like, or anybody? This is a cancer in the system, and it needs to be exposed. And I would propose the following. The clock begins with the hearings. Nobody will be prosecuted, go to jail, be punished for anything they did before, including perjury. Because if you start saying we're going to have an investigation like Hannity does every night, and then we're going to send you all to jail, nobody's going to cooperate. The slate is cleaned. The moment the investigation begins, if you perjure yourself in the course of the investigation, then you will be prosecuted. We need to know what happened for the reason she said. We don't know, but we have reason to suspect that the intelligence services were really off the reservation, and in fact, they don't even think there is a reservation. We need to know this. But we also need intelligence agencies. So we're screwed, and I would like to see not just LaRouche people or, I don't know, people of any persuasion, libertarians, but everybody ought to agree that we need this and make senators, which is probably the place it ought to be, do it. Otherwise, this will hang on like a malignancy to which there's no cure for decades. That would be the single most important thing we could do, I think.
Two more quick questions. Mueller's